recorded live.
Hello, this is Michael Adams with the Truthful Ministry, and you find it. It is February 11, 2016. We have another episode of Afternoons with Fizz. I believe this will be episode 4. Guests in the chat room, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I thought I'd just read a little bit from the Rulers of Evil. You can find the link there and the list of other things to read for the show. It says here, the mark of Cain is the stamp upon our foreheads. Across the centuries, our brother Abel has laid in blood, which we drew, and shed tears we caused by forgetting thy love. Believe it or not, this comes from Pope John the 23rd, a prayer, 1960, cited in the Vicars of Christ. We live in the New World Order, just as people under Augustus Caesar did. Not a future thing to be feared or avoided. The New World Order is a present reality to be identified, understood, dealt with, in a way most pleasing to God. It was God, after all, who established the New World Order. We can read about it in the Bible. In fact, the Bible is the only record we have that publicly and truthfully sets forth the essentials of the order's origins and development through time. The Bible records the great decisive events, and the progress of human life upon to the close of the 1st century AD. Creation of earth and the fullness thereof, creation of man and women, and the turning away from God, the first conception, the first birth, the first sacrifice, the first murder, the first insignia, the first city, the first and only great flood, the surviving family, its peculiar relationship through time with God, and all the momentous data is given in the Bible with a stark truthfulness that is invariably supported. Often, to the surprise of many, by the results of scientific inquiry, the writers of the Bible, Israelite prophets inspired by their God, Yahweh, held no monopoly on recording these events. Priests and other nations reported them too. But in doing so, they cunningly adapted them to fit prevailing administrative needs. The result of their adaptation is what we call mythology. Okay, and he's generously offered us an opportunity to be with him again. And Viz, thank you for joining us. Folks, for those who will be following along or want to follow along in the conversation, the first 4 links are the ones that we will be using in our discussion. The second 2, the 5th one is if you want to read the Rulers of Evil. They got PDFs that Japan has did for folks if they want to. And then there's thinkofbebeaten.com, and you can look at all the great information that Visigoth and along with others have contributed to helping us to have a better understanding of our world. I'm coming to a startling conclusion, folks, that the Word of God, along with studying your history, is how you're going to understand your reality, which should not be a startling conclusion. And but the more and more I do this, the more and more I am startled by the whole fact that so little we know and so little we want to know. And how foolish we are for not wanting to know the truth. With that, Liz, thank you for joining us. I know you're not feeling too hot. How's the audio? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. And we'll do our best we can. There's not much I could do, folks, on Fizz's end. Just listen up. Pay attention. How's that? Still, you can hear it. I know that Gordo was saying that, he was wondering, and you as well were wondering if there's anything I do on my end as far as the sound quality, but I don't know what I can do. So, But you sound good to me right on my end. So, folks, if there's any issues, let us know, okay? Those for listening. So,
I think
we're...
do nothing further. Yeah, great. Let us know.
Okay. Where should we start with this? I have sent in the link along in the information box the articles that you sent me. And, well, there's some stuff here to look at. That's fascinating here. Lincoln and the Russians. Albert A. Waldman. What an interesting story that is in itself. Where do we begin with this? Do we begin with that? Do we begin? Okay, where do we begin? You lead the way, my friend.
I originally had billed this or talked to you with regard to calling the Civil War the First World War. Do I believe that completely? No, but I mean it's provocative, but it's also close to the truth, although you didn't have the body count and all the other tragedy and destruction that attends World War. But it probably, the period of the mid-19th century, both in the United States, North America, and in Europe, and even in Pacific Asia, probably set things in motion that eventuated in World War I and II and where we are today.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
The beginning of something that was probably not all that understood at the time, like feeling for an elephant in the dark. You know, what is this thing? But I'll just say this. Countries that were somewhat or totally involved in this, meaning the Civil War, was not only the U.S., obviously, but Canada, Mexico, Great Britain, Ireland, France, Russia, Austria, Italy, and the Vatican. And if you really want to push it, you can throw Japan in there too. But that would be at a later time that I would even address that. But I couldn't even believe what was going on over there at the same time we were embroiled in the Civil War.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Again, you're right. And, you know, if you look at guys like Albert Pike and his letter to the Mancini and the Three World Wars, and these guys were all in the midst of this, weren't they? It didn't matter that we're on the other side of the pond. They were all working together regardless, weren't they? It didn't make a difference that much.
You see, we here in the States don't really think too much outside the box. Have a very American-centric view of everything, which is not necessarily our fault. I mean, that's what we were brought up on in the public school system. Mm-hmm. But we don't realize all that was going on outside of this Civil War. And there are questions I don't think that will ever be answered. I don't know if the way things turned out necessarily was what Europe wished. But the thing is this. Europe has always been the center of power. We think we are because we had a military and all this other stuff, but we were controlled by those in Europe. I mean, to get us involved in 2 world wars that had nothing to do with the United States, it was crazy. I mean, I had a discussion with a former old friend of mine, and I told him, I said, why in the world did we go to the aid of the Brits in both world wars? And he said, well, they were our allies. I said, what did they ever do for us? All I know is they came over twice and kicked our ass and left. So, what's the big deal? I mean, if they got themselves in a scrap they couldn't finish, hey, too bad. But at any rate. So we think of ourselves, I mean, Halford Mackinder, who's the first geopolitician, created a new kind of view of the map, the Mercator map. And instead of it centering on North America or the Western Hemisphere, switched it and turned it a little bit and showed us for being what he thought would be on the outside of the power structure in time to come, and we may be there right now. It's not all about us. In fact, we're going to start to fade. But Europe will never, I mean, I go back and forth with Liam about this, who lives in Northern Ireland. I don't believe for one bit that when we get into the next scrap, that it's going to go too badly for Europe because that's where the power center is. I mean, we're looking at the last manifestation of the unholy Roman Empire. So I don't think they're going to torch where they live in their own conceit and nobility. They probably wouldn't care much for what happened to Poland, Bulgaria, and the rest of the Balkan states, but, I mean, you're looking at the restoration of what was centuries ago.
Yeah.
And we see it here, although we've been veiled from that in our history, and yet Waldman's book, even newspaper accounts, speak to what was going on at the time, and it was just rife with foreign intrigues.
Yeah. It's undeniable. But if you look at, like we were saying about these wars, I mean, just look at present day. Outside of mineral rights and oil, why are we over there in the Middle East? Is it really to the vested interests of the United States of America to be there, really? The people? No. And that's how it's been always. Look at this, the history of this country and all the endless wars we've been in. How many were actually for the interest of what we know as the United States of America? In reality, little to none. Outside of, I guess, if you would say, like the Indian Wars, or taking over the continent itself. Outside of that, I can't see any benefit. Look at what's going on in the Philippines. Right after Civil War, was there any great benefit for us, the United States of America? I can't see any. And it just goes on and on and on. So, why we just seem to be, we are a satellite state of this Roman Empire, and they're simply their battering ram whenever they need the flex of muscle. They send us. Should I say us? Because we should even say we are our government, but their political institutions sends the youth. In your generation, it was Vietnam. In my generation, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. Prior to that, it was Korea, and then it was World War II, and then World War I, and this keeps going on and on and on. So.
I wanted to ask you, we're referring to the Philippines. Are you talking about what took place after the Spanish-American War?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't know if folks are aware of this. I know I wasn't. I was surprised to see this. Mark Twain was absolutely livid about the United States getting involved in the Spanish-American War, and even further, distraught at what took place after that conflict was over, and we went over to the Philippines and started smacking them around a little. If you get a chance, I don't remember the title of the book, but you can do a search on it, and you'll see his feelings. And what's really interesting about something that was in that book, do you remember, I don't know how long ago you go back to listening to Patriot Radio, whether it was GCN or RBN or whatever, but they used to like to use that quote about a patriot, something about a patriot is, laughed at or mocked or scorned or something like that. And they use it to say that it's good to be a patriot and that, they're the ones to rely on. But Twain is the author of that statement, and it's not used in its full context. And for the most part, he was saying, frankly, they're assholes, and they only come around, after something's occurred. It's the mob rule thing. So it's a crude paraphrase, I know, very crude. But I had to laugh because Twain did not mean it in that vein. And a lot of the promos that were being used, especially on GCN a decade ago, had that all the time on. And when I realized what Twain meant by it, even they distorted it, or at least edited it very freely for their own purposes. Patriots, other than perhaps what are thought of in the American Revolution, are usually on the other side of the fence.
Interesting. Yeah, it's. I don't know much about. I was never really involved in the Patriot movement per se. So, as I told you before, I think I was really jaded from my experience. I grew up. under the roof in the household of my father, who was in the Korean War, and whatever happened there, from the few letters that he read on the show, it was nothing but living hell that he went through. The Chinese were chasing him and his comrades, if you will, whatever. But I don't know what word to say, but his peers, thinking that they were fighting for democracy. In the end, they were just fighting for their own lives, and all the living hell that he saw, he never came back the same man. So I've never been really that patriotic because of my own personal experience of what I've experienced, whether it was my father come back from the Korean War, losing 2 uncles there in concentration camps that our government could have done something about and let them freeze in the cold of winter. The less I heard about my one uncle, he didn't even have his feet, but he still had a smile on his face, they said. And he still was a charming fella. He had no feet. And then my Uncle Tom, who ended up, he was in the Vietnam War and never was the same, and ended up having a tragic death where he's helping out a buddy in a carry-out in a place called Genoa, or just outside of Genoa, Ohio. And some kid came in and shot him. The bullet went through his neck all the way down through his stomach, and he died. So, and then my brother was Green Beret, and so by the time it was time for me, you know what I mean. From all my life experience and all things I've heard from my relatives, and then my own personal experience, and through marriage and the East Timor Action Network and all that, I was pretty jaded. So patriotism has never been a thing that really pushed me. If that makes any sense, you know what I mean?
Listen, this is a corporation.
Yeah,
I was
it is.
born into it. It demands money from me every year. I pay it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It just is. Patriotism is misused by the government, especially when they want to send young men and women off to war, or when they want more money from you. Otherwise, you don't hear a thing about it. Patriotism, nationalism. Orwell wrote an essay on it. It's pretty interesting. If you just put those words in plus Orwell, you'll find an essay he wrote on it. Where does patriotism end? When does nationalism begin? I'd say they're the same thing.
Exactly.
But don't give me the patriotism crap, because when I hear you telling me about that, that means you want something from me beyond what I already give.
Yeah, it's just like the old what's that song from Clearwater Revival?
Oh yeah,
it is.
I ain't no fortunate son.
It's about the truest song that was ever played on the radio, top 40, if you think about it.
I thought it was the best protest song of them all, and it was only 2 minutes long, and it was just like, holy mackerel, what was that?
This quote from Mark Twain is this: patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. Is that the quote?
That isn't it, but...
Okay, because that's the one I'm to keep on coming up with. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, yeah, that's the same thing, though. Everybody pulls it.
Right.
For the wrong reason. If you read it in the context of the whole essay, it is extremely different. And I did something on that years ago, and I was gifted with the book by someone, and then I went ahead and I read them and I sent them along, so I don't have it anymore. But I was stunned by Twain's attitude toward both the Spanish-American debacle and then the Philippines debacle. He was not a happy camper, so you don't expect that from Twain, because he's always looked at as being kind of glib and clever. But the anti-war side of him, at least directed toward the first one we ever got into, really, if you think about it, he was not at all happy with what his country was doing.
Well, think about it. In his time period, and he being witnessing, well, you got the Indian Wars, you got the Civil War, you got the Spanish. What else? He's one war after another. I think after a while, I'm sure he had his stomach full of the nonsense of patriotism and war. And seeing people and their destroyed lives. I mean, I think like about myself too. Yeah, I'm 48, so the generation of the first Gulf War, and then the second, and then etc. And I know guys personally who, from the first war, that never were the same. Health issues right off the bat, telling me stories. And for some reason, it just came to my mind too. When I was a Mormon missionary, of all things, and I was real close to the Big Ben, and I ran across this gentleman who was in the Falkland War, and he just broke down in tears. And I don't know, I guess he saw me, thought that was some kind of holy character. A Mormon missionary, young punk like myself, guy twice my age at the time, and just breaking down in tears and telling me all these things that had happened in the Falkland War, and then sending men to the death that really didn't have to die, and how they just really messed them up. And we glamorize war quite a bit in this country. I mean, that's an understatement, between video games and movies and patriotism and all that. But we as a country are not honest at all when it comes to consequences of war. And we don't give those who went there, exploited by war, their just due, their voice to be heard, and what had happened to them. And if we were really giving these men and women their opportunity to be heard, well, quite frankly, who would want to fight their wars anymore? You know what I mean? Because there's nothing but tragedy. Nothing that, outside of the people, the bankers, Rome, the elite, the blue bloods that you're talking about, the Europeans that own us, the investors, the stockholders of the corporation. And